I'm really excited here to have Andrew Freedman as our keynote speaker this morning. Andrew's title is Director of Marijuana Coordination, but Andrew actually deals with all cannabis-related issues and works closely with the Department of Agriculture on hemp, as well as coordinating the marijuana policy in the state. And Colorado has taken a very unique approach, and I think it's great that when the Amendment 64 was written, it was decided by the authors to include industrial hemp in that, and they actually approached Vote Hemp and the industry and asked for our support, and we did endorse that the petition, I should say. And it's been a landmark, and Colorado's done this the right way. They've come in and looked at the entire cannabis policy, and they're working hard to enable the hemp industry and make it sit side by side with the marijuana industry. So in any case, I want to just give you a little more background on Andrew. He's a Colorado native, and he holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy and political science from Tufts University. And in 2010, he earned his JD from Harvard Law School. After law school, Andrew joined John Hickenlooper's campaign for governor and was tapped to serve as Lieutenant Governor Joe Garcia's chief of staff. And during his time with Garcia, the Lieutenant Governor's office won a $45 million race to the top grant for early childhood education and created the Office of Early Childhood. Andrew left the Lieutenant Governor's office to become the Director of Colorado Commits to Kids and the Yes on 66 campaign, the largest effort to date to overhaul Colorado's education funding system. In 2014, he was appointed the state's first Director of Marijuana Coordination. As director, it's his mission to ensure efficient and effective regulation of Colorado's retail medical marijuana while promoting public health, maintaining public safety, and keeping marijuana out of the hands of children. Please welcome Andrew Freedman.
I originally thought that this speech was for 8:45, and I walked in and there was about 3 people here, and I was like, that's about right, and I can do this. And so I congratulate you guys. Most conferences that I show up to, 9:15 does not look like this, and so you guys are obviously very dedicated to the cause and very excited about where it's going. So I am the state's first Director of Marijuana Coordination. I tell rooms quite often, my mom was really proud when, I'm a nice Jewish boy, so my mom was really proud when I was the Lieutenant Governor's Chief of Staff. She went to all her parties and said that I was the Lieutenant Governor's Chief of Staff, and now that I'm the first marijuana czar in the country, she goes to all her parties and tells everybody that I'm the Lieutenant Governor's Chief of Staff. But hemp is a different story, actually. I think everybody can be proud of hemp, and so I'm happy to be here. I think the great hemp hope is still alive, and actually, if you follow the metrics right, you kind of couldn't expect to be at a better place for hemp so far, and there really is a ton of potential here. So I'm hoping that we get to a point where we can take questions, because I think actually the question and answer is probably the best part of all of these things. But I have really just as much, it's like silly for me to be up here giving speeches when really you guys are the ones forming the landscape of what's going on right now, and really what we're trying to do the most out of the state is figure out the best ways to help you with the federal government, but then really get out of your way and see how you can develop this industry. And so I feel silly telling you about what the history of hemp is, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I think it's important for you to know how we see it, so that when you come and educate us about issues, you know where we stand already, and we can continue the conversation and get a little bit further down the road. I'm sure I will say things that you will say, that is absolutely wrong, but that's why we're here today. I do want to start, I don't know if is anybody from the Department of Ag here right now? Is that Dwayne? Good, I was going to call out Dwayne. Dwayne should be standing up here speaking right now. And so Dwayne Sinning, for those of you who don't know him yet, he is a remarkable champion of hemp for you guys. We have once every 2 weeks, we have all the cabinet members who do anything for marijuana, everyone from the Department of Revenue to the Department of Public Health and Environment, the directors of all those departments and key staff, and the Department of Ag is there. And I think hemp would have been lost as a voice of a new industry had it not been for Dwayne Sinning. And so I think I'm just going to say everybody should give a round of applause to Dwayne and all the work he's been doing. I'm going to make it all the worse. I think he's the most important person for you to get your card from today. So you're welcome, Dwayne. There's a few other people I saw. The commissioner's not here, but the commissioner also really does believe that his job is to see this through, and has absolutely been all in, and not for a second has hesitated on how we can make hemp a new market in Colorado. I see some familiar people in the audience as well. I'm just pointing this out because it's kind of a fun world where you actually start to see characters come up. James McVaney bothers my office once every 2 months to tell me how I can make things better for the hemp industry, and always does it in the kindest way possible. Jonathan Miller often visits me. Where's Jonathan? Often visits me from Kentucky to tell them how much better they're doing it in Kentucky than they're doing it in Colorado. And I just think it's great that these voices are coming up. I'm going to give you a quick history of marijuana in Colorado, just so that we're all on the same page. Amendment 20 was passed in 2000. That was our medical marijuana code, and that was much closer to you could go to the doctor, you could get a recommendation, you could go home, you could grow your own plants, or you could have what was called a caregiver, which doesn't require registration, isn't a regulated industry. A caregiver could grow your marijuana for you, and they could grow about 5 patients' marijuana. And that's kind of the loose system that existed for 10 years all by itself, when suddenly the city of Denver and the state of Colorado decided that they needed to regulate marijuana as they were seeing people try to open up for-profit enterprises. And so then we had a medical marijuana code. People started selling for-profit marijuana. I think people liked that so much that in 2012, the voters passed Amendment 64, which was recreational marijuana, which allowed for you to grow 6 plants for yourself at home if you wanted to, but also allowed for-profit recreational marijuana stores. And by January 1st of 2014, we were open with all those things. And really, we haven't sunsetted a single one of those things. Those all exist in the marijuana world today. Hemp legalization is a little bit harder to track, I think, because in an effort from the federal government to allow for hemp along the way, it's kind of been a muddled pot. And so in Colorado, we have Amendment 64. It's pretty clear there is legalized industrial hemp. It exists alongside legal marijuana. And we have 2 different systems, and it's very clear in how it exists. What's legal on the federal side, I will let other people try to explain. I can tell you, I am a lawyer, and it is very unclear. I would do this long slideshow presentation of all the different ways in which the federal government has tried to add clarity, from the Farm Bill to notes from the USDA to prioritization from the Cole memo and I tell you, I truly don't know. And when I talk to people, I think they truly don't know. And I think probably the most important thing to do is continuing to find lobbying efforts to try to get actual clarification that does not involve jumping through weird hoops, but just simply says, how can we have a legal hemp program in Colorado, in states that want it, going forward? We just need your clarity on that, and then how can we do import and export for it? And we just need your clarity on that. I don't think we're there yet, and I could spend all presentation trying to say where I think we are, but I leave that to your lawyers to figure that out, and I think, unfortunately, it's probably the biggest barrier that you have going forward. And so that's just the state of the state. That's just how it exists, and we're happy to help you in any way we can with reaching out to the federal government and helping to figure this out. So I'm going to spend a second talking about how we regulate marijuana, because I think it helps us regulate you guys without being nearly as strict as we've had to be. So we had the Cole memo for both marijuana and hemp, but it basically says you need to know exactly where all your marijuana is. You need to make sure that criminal cartels aren't involved in it. You need to make sure that there's not firearms. You need to make sure that it's not going to children. You need to make sure that it's not going out of state. The main backbone that we have for that in the regulated recreational and medical marijuana system is our metric system, our seed-to-sale tracking of every marijuana plant with a radio frequency identifier tag that has to be entered in on every stage of the game, all the way from seed to sale. That, combined with videotaping of literally every square inch of marijuana, is how we can say with a straight face to the US DOJ, hey, we actually know where all of our regulated marijuana is. We don't necessarily know where the homegrown marijuana is, but at every step of the game, we know where regulated marijuana is. If you pull up somebody over on the road and they have 300 pounds of marijuana and they say that they're from a regulated shop, they're going to have a manifest with them. You're going to be able to call our marijuana enforcement division, and they're going to be able to say, yes, that is where that person is supposed to be, and yes, they are supposed to have 300 pounds of marijuana right now. So that's the good news, is that this is a highly, highly regulated industry. And I think that that's important for hemp because it lets us back off a little bit on the hemp side, because I think the place where you get the federal government very nervous on this is, how do we know that these aren't hemp guys, or that these hemp guys aren't marijuana guys? And so since we have such a strictly controlled marijuana program, it allows us to not have to as strictly control the hemp program, which I think would be an unreasonable constraint on hemp and probably would actually kill the hemp industry overnight. And so we really work hard to keep that closed loop system inside marijuana. James McVaney, I think, can tell me, we get in arguments all the time about why do we not let hemp and marijuana intermingle, especially CBD oil making its way into final marijuana products. And we realize that there's a lot of definitional problems there and how we do that. But the reason we try to keep you guys so separate is really so you don't have to get regulated the same way that we have to regulate the marijuana industry, which is really the most tightly regulated system I've ever seen in my life. And so in that way, you should thank your marijuana brethren for that. I was doing a little bit of research coming in. We have a lot of people on senior staff who got really excited about hemp, and I can think of our budget director, Henry Sobonay, just thought bringing on hemp has the biggest ability in the world to change it. And I do get asked, I need you to know, I get asked all the time, whatever happened to hemp? Why is hemp not working? And as we go through the numbers, I think hemp's working. I think what you expect to see overnight, and I think there's some barriers to entry, and I think there's some, unlike marijuana, there's some things that need to get started, and some cart and horse issues. Do you get processing first? How do you get processing without good import-export law? All of this stuff going on. But as I look at the numbers right now, year-over-year growth is exponential. It's actually greater than exponential right now. And demand is also exponential at this point. And so those are two areas that you would look at to say, hey, things could look really good. Just by a show of hands, have we done, is this the very first speech of this conference? Yes. Oh, cool. All right, then I'm going to talk to you about numbers. So in 2014, the first year hemp could be legally grown, it was really hard to get seed. It was hard to figure out how legally to get seed. And it was, I think, by the time we got registration and we got everything up and running, it was pretty far into the growing season already. So it was a pretty small year. We had a total of 259 registrants for 1,800 total acres, with only about 200 of those acres actually planted. In 2015, it got going a little bit more. The program had 301 registrants. I think as I hear Dwayne talk about it, I think the number was so high the first year because there was a novelty to being a registrant for hemp. But the real deal was we had 3,657 acres of outdoor production and almost 500,000 square feet of indoor production the first year alone. But then here's the good news. And this year we had 407 registrants, 9,020 acres of marijuana production, an additional 1.23 million square feet of indoor production. And so I think, as far as when you look at a growth curve, that's the kind of growth curve you want to see. And so that's good news. It's not the size that I think people want it to be, but I think it's heading towards the size that we want it to be. And on the import hemp side, I think you can see that there's a need for this. In 2015, there was a study performed that showed that we had 0 imported metric tons of marijuana in 2000, and approximately 1,200 metric tons in 2010 to about 3,300 metric tons in 2013. Imported hemp fiber has increased from 1,600 metric tons in 2010 to approximately 3,800 metric tons in 2013. So again, the kind of things that you would want to see if you're a basic economist about what hemp could do in Colorado, you're seeing right now, which is that as long as we could get things up and running on the production side, and as long as we can get through some of these barriers, the demand is there to really have this be a fast-moving market. And so I think that's some good news for the people of hemp. So let's talk about barriers. I'm not the best person to talk to you about sourcing seed, but I know that sourcing seed has been a problem. I am proud of the Department of Agriculture for having a certified seed program up and running now. I think the more robust that becomes over time and the greater amount of seed coming out of the certified seed program, the more we can make sure that you can feel comfort and confidence in the acres that you plant will actually be able to be used at the end of the day and won't have to be destroyed. I will say that so far, the destruction of plants because they are over 0.3% THC has actually been fairly low, been very, very low in fact, and there's been a good job of communicating between the Department of Ag and a grower about when they might be getting into trouble. The other thing we did manage to do is open up labs for everybody to be able to go and test and harvest a little bit earlier if it looked like you were in trouble of maturing to over that 0.3% THC. There is a lot of talk along the way about, hey, if we could have some forgiveness over the 0.3% THC, that might make it easier to have some confidence as well. And I think people get frustrated with us about how bright of a line that we put on that 0.3% THC. I think that bright line serves as should serve as a comfort to you guys about, again, the fact that we can put marijuana in its own category and so tightly track that and show the U.S. Department of Justice that we can so tightly track that leaves you guys, I think, freer from federal intervention. And I think if we start messing with that 0.3% THC, which is in some places their definition of hemp as well, I think we would get into more federal intervention trouble over on the agriculture side, over at the Department of Agriculture rather than the Department of Revenue. And so we protect that pretty closely, although we do feel for you and we do want to find new ways and really add to the certified seed program in a way to make sure that you guys feel comfortable that what you're growing will come out on less than 0.3% THC. Processing is, we don't really have a department that has really jurisdiction over processing. Once the plant is out of our hands and inside a off the farm and inside a processing facility, it's no longer the jurisdiction of the Department of Agriculture. I can't really think of who it really would be a specific jurisdiction of. Unlike marijuana, where we have to monitor all the way to sale, we don't have to do that with hemp. There's obviously FDA guidelines that you guys have to abide by. There's federal guidelines that everybody has to go through, but it doesn't have, again, that strict seed-to-sale nature that marijuana has. And so we're interested in knowing more about processing, but it really isn't something that we have the sort of numbers and overview that we have for Department of Revenue because, frankly, we don't control the stream of commerce in quite the same way that we do for the Department of Revenue and marijuana. So let's talk about some similar problems that you guys might be encountering. And I honestly don't know the extent to which you're encountering it, but legally you're in the same bucket as marijuana on this one. Banking probably being the biggest one. We've seen banking as a problem from day one. Seriously, when the governor brought me on, he said, we're going to do whatever we can to try to solve this banking problem. And we went out and we've been throwing Hail Mary passes ever since. Our first was the 2014 legislative session when we tried a cannabis co-op bill. And this was an ability to try to go and just let people in cannabis from marijuana to hemp co-op together and not require FDIC or NCUA federal share insurance, but be able to apply directly to the Federal Reserve for master accounts, and so that you guys could have merchant services. It was a kind of a way to get directly to the Federal Reserve and say, hey, let us in, and see if they would or would not, and really push the conversation with them. The bill passed, and actually there was a lot of confusion over hemp that session, which was very interesting to me. There were a lot of people who thought that hemp didn't have to be included in the co-op bill, and a lot of confusion over the legality of hemp. I think that's the first time I saw people openly arguing about whether or not you could legally bank or do anything with hemp compared to marijuana. It was very interesting to watch. The bad news was we went and talked to the Federal Reserve, and they said no way in hell. And so we said we're going to keep trying. And so a little later we We gave a certification to the very first credit union that was cannabis only. That was called Fourth Corner Credit Union, and they went out and both applied for NCUA federal share insurance, but they also went straight to the Federal Reserve and said, "Let us in." And the Federal Reserve said no. But not only did they say no, they actually sent a full page of everything that was wrong with them and why they couldn't do it. Everything from we didn't get fingerprints from all your board members to this is an illegal industry. And then at the end said, even if you solve some of these problems, it's just too hard for you to do this, and so you're not allowed to apply for to get a membership in the Federal Reserve ever again. Which was very interesting to me because I've never actually seen that happen. It's yet one new place where marijuana has made new law or new precedent in America. They sued and they lost in district court. And so those ways had not gone so well for us. I tell you what has worked in banking is community banks and credit unions have really stepped up into the space. It's more of a getting permission or getting forgiveness rather than asking for permission, but I do not know that these people are getting too much pressure from the federal government about relax or not having as many marijuana customers, as long as they're following pretty strict guidelines about filling out suspicious activity reports. They are beginning to take in customers, and we are seeing, my joke is that we now are not unbanked, we're underbanked, and you could even say that we're half banked. All right, good. 9:15, you gotta throw something in, right? Okay. The deal is I think we're far from solved, but the more you guys can engage with and get community banks to figure out how to be involved and credit unions, the more we'll be there in the short term. I think in order to solve banking in the long term, especially the credit card issue, because even if you have a bank, Visa and MasterCard will shut down credit card systems along the way and say you can't have credit even if you have a bank account. But the more and more we can get credit unions and community banks to engage with these businesses, we'll have our short-term solution, and then later on we can try to go get a congressional long-term solution, kind of a safe harbor act on the federal side to just say people should be able to have banking relationships. That's just good, smart, public safety sense, and it's the kind of regulatory oversight we want anyway. So that's my hope in banking. Professional services are interesting as well. Certainly on the marijuana side, and I've heard a bit on the hemp side, even something like getting an accountant to engage in your business when technically, or in their minds, it could be a federal crime to do so. It does really kind of hamper your ability to get at the best professional services. Over time, I've seen kind of everybody start to realize that, no one's going to pull up the paddy wagon for you, right? That if they're going to go after someone, they're going to go after the people who are growing large-scale marijuana grows, and they're also going to give them a warning that says we're no longer going to see this as legal. And so the risk analysis for a lot of people have been, you know what, it's worth it, we're going to get into this. And we've started to see professional services flow into this industry. It's also a fun industry to be a part of. There's very few things that have so much growth potential that are so new that don't come with risk anyway. And so you see a lot of people make risk analysis and say, I want in. I do think that there's one thing that can happen in the next 2 to 3 years that could really freeze that, and that's litigation. The first thing is that a new president can come along and just stop everything right away, and that will be an interesting time to watch. But since that's so hard to predict, I'll tell you the other route that I'm seeing for people who are kind of anti-cannabis try to get their way is large-scale lawsuits. The one that I watch the most is the Safe Streets Alliance lawsuit, where they took a few marijuana licensees and they sued not only them on a private right to a RICO action, which Jonathan Miller will explain to you later on if you want an answer to that. A private right to a RICO action. They are also including everyone involved in the chain. And so that's the banking relationship they had, that was their surety bond relationship they had, the real estate relationship they had. It was up and down the chain. Everybody got sued, and what it really did, the surety bond people settled for about $50,000, and overnight we had a problem getting surety bonds for marijuana. They suddenly saw that they put themselves at litigious risk for this. There was some loosening of the regulation from our side. We actually took the need to have a surety bond in marijuana out, but it was a very quick guide to how quickly professional services can be frozen for you guys. And so what I would watch, if you were concerned about that, is really what's happening in litigation. If a large-scale litigation succeeds, then I think overnight you will have more trouble getting accounting, banking, real estate relationship, all the sort of ancillary services you guys need going forward. Touching quickly on pesticides, we can go through what happened again, more on the marijuana side than I've heard it on the hemp side, but it certainly affects you guys in the same way. I think on the marijuana side, there was a lot of people who had just been kind of using whatever they had been using for a very long time, and with absent very much direct impact from, or influence from the administration, and the federal government certainly wasn't coming in. We heard a lot of people were just like basically going onto messaging boards and saying, what do you use to get rid of spider mites? What do you use to get rid of fungus? Our commissioner came in and was very concerned about this. He said on day one, 10 years from now, we're going to see that people have been using sort of pesticides that are really harmful to people, and these are chronic illnesses that can come up from harmful pesticides. If we don't step in now, it's really on us. And so he gave us the mission to say that we should be holding marijuana the same standards for pesticides use as we do any other new crop. And that's hard because the EPA is not involved, and so A, what standards do we use? How do we kind of in-house what we see from the EPA? And B, we don't really have new pesticides coming into the market and helping to deal with how do you make this work. And so for the first time ever, the Department of Agriculture, Department of Revenue, Department of Public Health and Environment team together and say, all right, how's the best way that we can work together and make sure that it's properly labeled, that it's okay to be eaten, that it's okay to be smoked, that it doesn't have what I think most of you already know, but tolerance levels, because we don't know what the tolerance levels would be allowed to be, and how do we educate up our population, our licensees on how to grow like this. It was mayhem at the beginning. We did put millions of dollars of crops on hold. We'll get to questions in 2 seconds. It was mayhem at the beginning. Oh, are you saying 5 minutes? Perfect. I got you this time. That's confusing, right, guys? Okay. But over time, we did see that people have started to react, and when I talk to industry and when I talk to hemp producers, they really say, no, we got the message, and everybody's working their hardest to get up to speed on pesticides. We're also hearing more and more from pesticide manufacturers that they're looking to get in the game, and that they're looking to make it through what's called the 24C process to get their labels changed in order to allow for that use on what would be hemp and marijuana. I will say the last thing I'll end with is the national landscape and what you guys can look for. Like it or not, I think hemp and marijuana are so intricately tied together that I would watch marijuana and see what's happening with that, about where legalization of hemp is going next. There's the other way of thinking about it, which is the legalization of hemp first and then move towards marijuana. But the conversations as I hear it is everybody thinks hemp is the camel's nose under the tent for recreational marijuana, and so I kind of think you guys are just going to be married together throughout this entire thing. The good news in Colorado, consumption rates of marijuana have not changed since legalization. It's short term, and these are long-term trends, so I urge people not to take too much out of that data. But youth use and adult use marijuana came out roughly the same in 2011, 2012 to 2015. And so that's good news. We do watch and are more concerned about driving while high. I think that's a real weakness of both our data doesn't really show what's going on all that well, but also it's a place to be concerned because those numbers are going up. We are training more officers to be able to recognize it, so you would expect the numbers to go up, but nonetheless, the data is the data. And the second is hospitalizations are as well going up that are marijuana related. And so everything else seems to be tracking on national trends, and there doesn't seem to be a large spike in anything overly concerning about public health, public safety, or youth use. And so I think people will be looking to Colorado and really dissecting that information over the coming months as California, Massachusetts, and a slew of other states consider recreational medical marijuana. With that, I'll leave the littlest bit of time for a question or two, and then thank you for your time. Yep.
Thank you, Andrew, for including information on pesticides. I'm Ethan Russo. I just published a study in the legal market in Washington State where we looked at 26 samples from the legal market, flowers and concentrates, and I'm afraid to say that 85% were contaminated, sometimes grossly, with pesticides. Do you have any idea what the rates are currently in Colorado in the recreational market?
So I think our testing is not where we want it to be. That's the first thing. The only people who are certified to test right now for marijuana is the Department of Agriculture. They are the gold standard of testing, and I trust the tests that come out of the Department of Agriculture. It's taking a lot more to get our private labs up and certified, and so I will not say that we are right now more on a complaint basis than we are. So I'm not sure a rate would be all that helpful when you're on a complaint basis. I will say when I talk to the Department of Agriculture, it is getting better by 2 times as much over time. The numbers are going way, way down for who's testing positive, even when we get a complaint. And so I would venture to say the vast majority of marijuana people are now, I don't think we would get an 85% number. 1 minute. One last question, are we sure? Way in the back. Yeah, and I come as this big wet blanket and say don't expect much from the tax revenues. We got about $135 million last year, all told, medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, taxes and fees on marijuana for the calendar year. Sounds really great. I try to remind people it's a $27 billion budget. Of that, 40 million went to school construction, and that's great. That's about 10 roofs on schools, and so. The rest of it, we put about 20 to 30 million back into regulation, so regulation gets paid first. And then we did youth prevention campaigns, not just for marijuana, but just how do you reach high-risk youth and get them out of the criminal justice system and into good public health programs, good after-school program, that sort of stuff. The other half went to substance abuse programming, and again, not marijuana-focused, but overall drug abuse-focused. How do you get people who are addicted to substances back back into safe, healthy lifestyles and contributing members of society. I think it's really good money. I think it goes towards really good things. I get a lot of anger towards our office about why we haven't repaired all the schools and why they didn't get a gym in their backyard. And the answer is you're talking about a $5 billion need when you're talking about school construction in Colorado, and you're talking about $40 million. So you're just not going to get there with a sin tax. And so I do try to calm people's expectations about what will come with marijuana tax revenue. And on that sour note, I want to say thank you for your time. I really do wish the best for hemp. I'll be around for a few minutes, and I really love talking to you guys. Thank you.